Hey everyone, I'm Rather Incoherent, and today I want to talk to you about Seekers. This is going to be my final follow-up to the statline video where I talk about how classes specifically deal with the weaknesses of their stat lines. With Seekers, you can see that generally they have pretty terrible fist scores. Barring Joe Diamond, all of them have 2 or less. Mandy and Harvey only have 1. They've dump statted their fist incredibly hard. The difference here is that unlike Rogues and Guardians who have to deal with their weaknesses during the mythos phase, Seekers don't. Fist is a stat you choose to use. So fundamentally, having less fist doesn't do anything. It does, however, prohibit you from fighting in a direct and standard fashion. If you want to punch a rat as a Seeker, you'd better be playing Joe Diamond, because otherwise you're probably going to miss the rat. However, it is in no way going to prevent you from playing a bunch of cards that deal damage, which is the point of fighting to begin with. And boy howdy, do Seekers have a bunch of cards that deal damage. These aren't quite all of the Seeker cards that deal damage, and in fact, one of them doesn't deal damage, but it may as well. But they are the most commonly used and talked about Seeker cards that deal damage. So, let's get into it. These cards are not created equally. Some of these are fair and well designed, some of them are okay, some of them are strong, and a handful of them are completely and utterly broken. But before I get into them, I just want to say that generally speaking, I'm not upset with the idea of Seekers having cards that deal damage. That doesn't bother me. For the same reason I'm not upset that Guardians have events that get clues. What bothers me is how strong the Seeker cards that deal damage are. And initially they're fine. Mind over matter isn't a problem. It's a 1-cost fast event, and it lets you use your book in place of your fist and foot for a round. That's completely fine. The upgrade just draws a card, it doesn't even change it offensively. This basically just lets you evade an enemy that was going to survive and deal lots of damage, something massive like Umerdhoth probably, or something with Retaliate that your Guardian was afraid of fighting. And then you contribute 1 or 2 chip damage, and that's it. This is completely fine. It's so fine that it usually doesn't make the cut in most decks. I've Got a Plan is a card I absolutely loved when I first started playing the game, and it's fallen off in my opinion quite a lot. It's a 3-cost event, it fights using your book, and you deal +1 damage for each clue you have. The problem is that even if you have 3 clues and you're swinging it for 4, your book, not counting things like magnifying glass, is likely a lot of the time going to be like 5 to 6. So since you're actually swinging with a test at an enemy, despite the fact this hits like a truck, it's not guaranteed to kill them at all. You can just fail, and you can always auto-fail. And as well, you aren't fully in control of how many clues you have because you're progressing acts. A lot of the times, this won't be online, and a lot of the time, you might not have 3 resources to feed in this event. You're a clover, you're probably using your money on other things. It's a lot to just walk around holding 3 resources. Yellow Economy is good, but it's not good enough to run too many cards like I've Got a Plan. And its upgraded version gives you a +2 book for the test, which really helps with that problem I was highlighting, where if you're playing someone like Rex or Ursula and you've only got Milan and magnifying glasses, you'd be testing at 5 to whatever their fight is. This really helps with that problem and also lowers the cost, which is much needed because I was complaining about the economy. I've Got a Plan is a good, balanced card. I would play it over Mind Over Matter in a lot of decks, and I have in the past. And again, I think I've Got a Plan is completely fine. Occult Invocation is in the exact same boat. Occult Invocation is a 2-cost event, and you discard up to 2 cards from your hand when you play it. You fight using book instead of fist, and you get +1 to book and +1 to damage for each of those cards you discarded. So its top end is a little bit less than I've Got a Plan, but it's still very strong. It still gets over that 3 health hump. And since Seekers have insane draw, this cost of discarding cards isn't that big of a deal. However, Occult Invocation marks the point on this list, which we're getting to very early, where we've talked about all the cards that I actually like the design space they inhabit. After this point, I dislike the design space of every single one of these cards progressively more. Strange Solution is a 4 experience card. It's a 1-cost asset that takes up no slots. It has 3 uses. You have to go through the rigmarole of identifying it like all of the Seeker identification assets. But once you do, it has action, spend 1 of 3 supplies, fight with a base skill of 6, this attack deals 3 damage. Its relatively low fight score of 6, combined with the fact that it's not using book, so you can't commit things like perception to this, largely keep this card balanced. There are a lot of enemies that this is decently likely to miss. However, the design space this inhabits of just letting Seekers fight with fist at 6 for 3 damage, despite not thinking this acidic Ichor version of Strange Solution is overpowered, I hate the game space it inhabits. And much like Strange Solution, I dislike Necronomicon, but not because of how strong it is offensively. Necronomicon's a 3-cost hand asset tome. It costs 8 experience with Taboo, 5 without. It's limited to 1 per deck, and it has a variety of uses. The one relevant to our discussion is fast action, spend 4 secrets, it only has 6, to deal 3 damage to an enemy engaged with you. That's offensively not that crazy. It's a 3-cost hand asset that's able to deal 3 damage to an enemy engaged with you once. Nothing crazy about it. Where Necronomicon's really broken is with those first 2 abilities. You either spend 1 secret to get an Unexpected Courage 6 times, or spend 2 secrets to draw 2 cards 3 times. And you just play it out, vomit out all the secrets, and then recur it somehow. You use Library Docent or Scavenging to get it back in your hand, and you do it all over again the next turn. The damage part of Necronomicon is completely balanced in my eyes. In fact, the spend 3 secrets, discover a clue at any location is largely balanced in my eyes. It's really just the first 2 parts of Necronomicon that are a problem, and honestly, I've mostly included it in this list because its absence would be conspicuous. But now we're moving on from cards where I dislike the game space they inhabit, to these cards probably shouldn't exist in anything resembling their current form. These last 5 cards, which are really only 3 cards, as Occult Lexicon, the upgraded Occult Lexicon, and Blood Right are all the same card, are just aggressively overtuned. Ancient Stones is the one that is the least offensive in a vacuum. Ancient Stones is a 4 experience identification asset and seeker. It's a 2-cost hand asset, and it has uses X. X is the number in parentheses next to you have identified the stone. So what does uses X usually mean? Normally, it's going to be 7, sometimes 8 or 9. The way it works is when you identify this, you take a location's investigate test at +3 shroud, and that's the number of uses it'll have once you upgrade it. So you're always going to be able to find a 4 shroud location to do this at, sometimes 5, sometimes 6. And of course, there are gimmicks that get to much higher numbers than 6 plus 3. Things like Drawing Thin or Double or Nothing get you to absolutely ridiculous numbers of Ancient Stone charges. But the important thing is what we do with these 7 to 9 charges. The effect is reaction. When you draw any number of cards, spend that many secrets, deal that much damage to an enemy at your location. Ancient Stone's Knowledge of the Outers allows you to convert card draw into testless damage. Since Seeker is the class that's best at card draw, this can get pretty out of hand. Now, specifically with Mandy and Harvey, they can capitalize on Ancient Stones to a degree that it's problematic in a vacuum on them, but I can't really attribute that to Ancient Stones as much as I can to the characters that are abusing it. However, outside of that vacuum, any Seeker can capitalize on this, with cards like Deep Knowledge and Cryptic Research. But to be honest, I don't think it's too game-breaking to have Ancient Stone Knowledge of the Elders in the game. I think it's aggressively powerful, but I think there's an appropriate number of hoops to jump through to get it to be really effective and worth the experience. Anyway, speaking of the strongest strategies available to Seeker, let's talk about Pendant of the Queen. Despite being on this list, Pendant of the Queen doesn't deal damage. But it does exhaust any enemy, even elite enemies, at any location. It has only 3 charges, but Seeker has plenty of ways to cheat out more charges. So Pendant of the Queen might not let you kill any enemy, but it does let you just turn off any enemy on the map every round forever if you build a deck that can generate charges for it, which is not that hard to do for many of the characters in yellow. And even if you only get the 3 charges out of this, if you're playing without Taboo, it's completely insane, but with Taboo and only having 3 charges, it's still easily one of the strongest cards in yellow. The reason Pendant of the Queen is on this list, even though this list is about dealing damage, is because the point of dealing damage is enemy management. And the ability to testlessly evade any enemy anywhere on the map is insane enemy management. Pendant of the Queen is broken in a lot of different ways, and I'm not going to dwell on it too much in this video. Suffice it to say that the taboo that makes it removed from the game when you finish using it is nowhere near enough to balance out this card. It just makes it so that not every single Seeker runs it in every single deck. If I rate any card above Ancient Stone, Knowledge of the Elders, and Pendant of the Queen, that's basically an open admission from me that I think the card is completely and utterly broken. Occult Lexicons and Blood Right are offensively strong. The point of Occult Lexicon is to put Blood Rights in your deck, so let's start there. Blood Right's a bonded card. Occult Lexicon is going to put 1 of them into your hand and 2 of them into your deck when you play it. It's a 0-cost event, and it commits for icons. You are never committing this for them, so the icons don't matter. So, it's a zero-cost event, and the last line of text is very important. It does not provoke attacks of opportunity. You draw 2 cards, and then discard up to 2 cards from your hand. For each card discarded, you may either gain 1 resource or spend resource to deal 1 damage to an enemy at your location. It's hard to look at that without ever having played it and understand just how broken that is. Let's look at it as an economy card for a second. You draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and gain 2 resources. That's better than emergency cash in most situations. If you have like 4 cards in hand and 2 of them are like clearly weaker cards in the situation you find yourself in, playing a Blood Right to draw 2 cards, discard the 2 weaker cards, and gain 2 resources is usually really solid. If there are no enemies on the board, Blood Right is always fine as a card for something else. With the exception of Pendant of the Queen and the Necronomicon, all the other cards on this list just kill things. It's Occult Lexicons, Necronomicon, and Pendant of the Queen that are useful outside of combat. Outside of combat, Blood Rights are simultaneously economy and draw. Where it gets more offensive, though, is when you look at Occult Lexicon level 3. This is a new card, and it is upsetting to me. It is, in my opinion, easily the most imbalanced card in the game. It has the ability Reaction. When you play a copy of Blood Right, either change each 2 on it to a 3, or shuffle it into your deck instead of discarding it. And unlike the previous Occult Lexicon, which would remove your Blood Rights in the game if you get rid of it, losing this Occult Lexicon keeps the Blood Rights in your deck. The limit once per deck absolutely does not matter. You're a Seeker. You have the best draw in the game and Research Librarian. You can get this card with no issues. And the effects they'll have if they are removed from play, where you lose your Blood Rights or your Blood Rights get weaker, basically never come up. It's not a big deal at all. So, how good is shuffling it into your deck instead of discarding it? So, as an economy card with a level 3 Occult Lexicon, Blood Right is either arguably better than Emergency Cash and it shuffles back into your deck, or it is just better than Emergency Cash. Draw 3, discard 3, provided your hand isn't literally empty, is objectively better than do nothing. If that is a confusing statement, then I'll have to make a video about card game theory at some point. But the quickest way to visualize this is if you have a 5-card hand, the effect draw 25, discard 25 would just tell you pick what 5 cards in your deck you want to be in your hand. Technically, your hand size hasn't changed, but what is in your hand has just improved massively because you got to pick what it was. That's what Blood Right does at a smaller level. But we're talking about it as an economy card. And despite being a really good economy card, that's not what this video is about, is it? Because you see, Blood Right is disgustingly more efficient as a damage card. The ability to testlessly deal 2 damage is incredibly strong. The ability to deal Testus 3 damage is absolutely disgusting. 3 damage is an important hump. A lot of standard weapons in the game, Machete, 45 automatic, so many others, deal 2 damage. So as a consequence, the game was designed with a lot of 3 health enemies that are meant to pose a meaningful obstacle to those weapons. And Occult Lexicon level 3 lets you change the 2s on Blood Right into a 3 and kill those enemies as one testless action. These enemies that were designed to be a challenge. Ancient Stones, you can only draw so much in a given turn. Necronomicon uses 4 secrets each time it deals damage. But Blood Right's drawing towards the next Blood Right every time you use it. If you're playing a 2-player game and your Seeker encounters a 9 health or less boss, they can usually just play 3 consecutive Blood Rights off their Occult Lexicon level 3 and kill it. My first time through the Circle Undone, I was running Occult Lexicon on Harvey. Because I had Occult Lexicon in one hand and Ancient Stones in the other. I had the ability to easily deal 13 points of damage without taking a test. And that's why I said Ancient Stones in a vacuum so often when I was talking about it. Ancient Stones isn't that big of a problem, but it synergizes very directly with Blood Right. Anytime you play a Blood Right with Ancient Stones in play, you can spend its secrets to deal additional damage. As a single action, testlessly, you can cycle 3 cards into your hand, spend 3 resources, and deal 6 damage if you have both of these cards in play. The problem isn't that Seekers have way too many options for dealing damage. They do have a lot of options for dealing damage, and being good at dealing damage despite having dumps out of their fist is really optimal, and it's mostly upsetting because other classes aren't that well optimized. But that's not why I'm upset about how good Seekers are at dealing damage. Pendant of the Queen is the best enemy management tool in the entire game. Also, it's the best movement tool in the entire game, and if you don't need to do either of those somehow, it can discover one clue from any location for free without taking a test. And all of these abilities are lightning bolts, by the way, they don't even cost you actions. Seriously, it sounds like I'm roasting a terrible custom card. Nothing like this should have ever been printed. Ancient Stones might be fine and interesting in a vacuum. It would be really compelling if Seekers had to think about how to optimize Ancient Stones if they really wanted to contribute to damage. But they don't need to think very hard because the answer is just Occult Lexicon. And both of these cards are individually good. It's not like they're bad combo pieces. Occult Lexicon is one of the best cards, probably the best card in the entire game on its own. Ancient Stones is definitely nowhere near as strong on its own, but you're playing Seeker, you have cards like Deep Knowledge, it's still useful, it's still good on its own. So the issue isn't all of these other cards. Even Occult Lexicon level 2 in a vacuum isn't that bad, but it's still offensive, so let's get it out of here. Stuff like this, and Gaze of Orash, the curse payoff card that I didn't bother talking about. Those cards are fine. I might not like the design space some of them inhabit, but it's not a problem to give Seeker damage. It's a problem to give anyone this. These cards are too much. Seekers might have the worst fist in the game, but to say they're the worst at fighting is comically wrong. They need to set up cards to fight. They can only fight for so long before they start to run out of resources as they channel Bloodright after Bloodright or run out of secrets on their Ancient Stones. But how much testless damage do you really need to finish a scenario? If you just played Occult Lexicon for three times and Ancient Stones used all 7 secrets, that's 13. As the primary Clover, do you think 13 testless damage was enough to carry your team? Probably, right? Like, you probably don't need to do more than that. As Harvey, you can do way more than that. In Black Throne, I dealt like 25 testless damage. One of my teammates accused me of playing a character that was more flex than Clover at the end of that, and these were the only 2 damage cards in my deck. Seekers have bad fist. They have plenty of cards that let them contribute to combat, and that's fine. But they have a couple of cards, and I do specifically mean 3, Pendant of the Queen and Knowledge of the Elders and Occult Lexicon, both levels, that are aggressively overpowered when it comes to enemy management. None of these cards require you to make a test. All of them are extremely easy for Seekers to capitalize on. At the end of the day, they don't just compensate for having a low fist. They have more burst damage and consistent damage than anyone else in the game. You might not be able to rely on them as your primary fighter to kill random enemies across the course of the game because they'll eventually run out of resources, unlike a traditional fighter. But dear God, if you just need somebody to contribute during times of crisis, when bosses show up or several enemies cascade at the same time, Seekers are the best in the game at that. They are better at dealing burst damage than any other color, including Guardians, and that's unacceptable. This is the biggest part of why Seekers are overpowered. If you remove these 3 cards from the game, my tier list completely changes. There's not much more to say on the matter, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I've been rather incoherent. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then like, comment, subscribe. All of that really helps the channel grow. And I'll see you in the next one.